I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. As you can see, Lawrence Hamm has an amazing, wonderful, and extensive bio that is found within our program. So I won't read our entire bio, but I will highlight some amazing accomplishments of our speaker. Lawrence Hamm has been a relentless advocate for African Americans and the cause of human rights and civil rights for all oppressed people for more than 46 years. Raised in Newark, he attended public schools and at the age of 17 emerged as a forceful spokesperson for the educational needs and aspirations of Newark students and the community. He was appointed at the time to the Newark Board of Education, making him the youngest voting school board member in the entire United States. He received a bachelor's degree and graduated cum laude from Princeton University in 1978. And for my students, I want you to pay attention here that while at Princeton, Mr. Hamm organized the campus anti-apartheid movement, so he was an incredible student leader. Amongst other things, Mr. Hamm has been widely interviewed by and quoted in the media. His work has been discussed in several books, including A Nation Within a Nation, as well as Crashing the Party. He has appeared in the documentary films, including Revolution 67, which focuses on the 1967 Newark Rebellion. He has received many leadership and service awards, and in 2017, Mr. Hamm was placed on the 2017 Insider NJ 100 Power List of influential people in New Jersey. In 2016, he was the National Education Association Human and Civil Rights Award winner, receiving the organization's Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Award. And in 2015, Mr. Hamm received the key to the city of Newark from Mayor Ras Baraka. Without further ado, please give a round of applause for our keynote speaker, Lawrence Hamm.
Power to the people. Martin Luther King lived like him, dare to struggle, dare to win. Say it with me. Martin Luther King lived like him, dare to struggle, dare to win. Martin Luther King lived like him, dare to struggle, dare to win. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. I'm very glad to be here with you this afternoon to celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. I'm a little hoarse, as you can see in my voice. I spent the King holiday on Monday marching for justice, and we were chanting all day, so I lost my voice, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to be with you. In fact, there are people here in the room who were at Metropolitan Church on Monday when I spoke, and they'll tell you by the time I got there Monday evening, I was croaking like a frog. The next day, Tuesday, I was scheduled to speak Tuesday evening. I had to cancel that speaking engagement because I could not get any sound out of my throat. I was speaking in a whisper, and I felt some kind of way about this because Brother Guzman, give that brother a big hand, Professor Guzman. Now, Professor had asked me back in November, maybe even before then, to be at this program, and I couldn't on Tuesday night. I couldn't talk. So yesterday, I went to the doctor, and I whispered to the doctor. I said, "Doctor, I got a whole bunch of folks at Jersey City University that want to hear me speak. Is there anything you can do?" So he gave me a steroid shot, and it knocked me out, but it gave me enough voice to come and speak to you today. And I'm so glad to see that you are observing the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. One of the things that gives me cause for concern, jubilation in one sense that I'm glad all of us are here together to observe the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, but I have some sadness because there are not enough King celebrations going on across the country. Every university, every school, every church should be having a Martin Luther King celebration. And I'm so glad that we have a Martin Luther King holiday. But this holiday, brothers and sisters, was not given to us through the beneficence of Congress, nor was it given to us through the generosity of the President of the United States. The President didn't even want to sign the legislation making the third Monday of January a King holiday. Where did this desire for a King holiday begin? It began with someone with whom you may be familiar. I know you think I'm going to say Coretta Scott King or Ralph Abernathy, but the real driving force in the early years to get the King holiday was a young man by the name of Stevie Wonder. How many of y'all know that? Stevie Wonder helped make this holiday a national holiday. In fact, the money and the funds for the campaign, and that's what we had to do. We had to have a campaign to make this a national holiday, came from Stevie Wonder. The office was open with money that he donated. The funds were kept on, the phones were kept on with funds that he raised. And once the holiday was achieved, he didn't even stop there. He made a song. Y'all know the song. Happy birthday to you. Sing it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Yes. Give Brother Stevie Wonder a big hand, because he helped make this a national holiday. And you know how long it took for them to make this a national holiday? 10 years. I was a student at Princeton University when the campaign to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday got underway. And I'm going to tell you, people thought those of us who said that America should make a national holiday for Martin Luther King, they said a national holiday for a black man, this country, it had never happened. But there's a lesson here, brothers and sisters. You should not let your imagination be circumscribed by the thinking of people who don't believe the impossible can be achieved. If people who had a vision of how things could be changed were circumscribed by the short-sighted thinking of those around them, social progress would not be possible. Imagine what it must have been like during the period of enslavement when somebody who was enslaved said, we're going to be free one day. Now, 10 generations had already been born into slavery. And the other people looked around, they said, well, Master got the guns, Master got the dogs, Master got the horses, he got the chains, he got the law, he got everything. But what Master didn't have was the determination of people to be free. And that's how we brought slavery to an end. And that's how we got the King holiday. People were determined to make that happen. Today, in towns and cities across this country, there are streets named after Martin Luther King. In Newark, New Jersey, where I come from, there used to be a street called High Street, a major thoroughfare through Newark. In fact, it runs through where all the big colleges are located. Rutgers University, NJIT, Essex County College, all were on High Street. And one day a young man, same age as many of you sitting in the audience, named Alan King, how ironic, said, I'm going to start the petition drive in Newark to change the name of High Street to Martin Luther King Boulevard. Now, when this finally got public that it was going on, let me tell you, strange things happening. Places where we thought the idea would be championed, in fact, said they didn't want the street name change. The universities, the citadels of higher learning and liberal thinking, said they did not want the address of their colleges to be Martin Luther King Boulevard. Now, had we listened to the people with the authority, had we listened to the people who had the degrees, had we listened to the people who had the title president behind their name, there would not be a Martin Luther King Boulevard. But we didn't listen to them. We listened to the people. And the people wanted Martin Luther King Boulevard, and that's what it is today. I stand before you today as a product of the civil rights movement. I stand before you today as a product of the Black Power movement, which arose out of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement fought its two great accomplishments, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And after the Voting Rights Act was passed, millions of African Americans who had been kept from the polls were now politically empowered. And they went to the polls and they voted. In 1966, there were 465 black elected officials in the United States of America. By 1972, there were over 10,000. In Newark, New Jersey, we had an uprising in 1967 because Newark was an apartheid town. It was a majority black town that was under the control of a white minority political structure. And police brutality, the beating of a black cab driver, lit the fuse one night, and the rebellion in Newark began. We don't call it a riot. If it had been a riot, it could have been taken care of by the police. But it couldn't be taken care of by the police. They had to call in 700 state troopers. They couldn't take care of it. And then they had to call in the Army, 1,500 National Guard. And then that wasn't enough. They had to declare martial law. So when you have to call in the Army and you have to declare martial law, that's not a riot. That's a rebellion against injustice. And out of that rebellion came the Black Power movement. Literally 2 weeks after the uprising in Newark, there was a Black Power conference in Newark. A year later, there was a Black Power convention at West Kenny High School, still there. A year after that, there was the Black and Puerto Rican Convention held in 1969. And out of that Black and Puerto Rican Convention came the community choice, Ken Gibson for mayor, and others running for the city council. And in 1970, Ken Gibson became the first African-American mayor, not just of Newark, but of a major city on the east coast of the United States. A year later, there was a teacher's strike in Newark. It was the largest, longest teacher's strike in the history of the country. And students like myself, I was a senior at Arts High School. That's right. I was a senior at Arts High School. We were caught in the middle. The strike went on so long that the law was if you missed 35 consecutive days of school, you could not graduate. Now, we had already applied and been accepted at colleges. So we said we got to get the board and the union together to work this thing out. So learning from the civil rights movement, learning from the students who were the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, who were in organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, seeing them engaged in freedom rides and sit-ins and protests on the news every night, we said, this is what we're going to do. And in March of 1971, 499 of the 500 students at Arts High School marched out of Arts High. I was the organizer of that march. And we went down to the Gateway Hotel, the same gateway that's there now, across the street from Penn Station. 200 of the 500 got into the Gateway, and we took over the 6th and 7th floors of the Gateway Hotel. And we said we were not leaving until the board and the union resolved their differences. Mayor Gibson came to us. It was a big commotion. They called out, must have been every police car in Newark was downtown. Every fire engine was down there. Remember, there had just been a rebellion 3 years prior. But we believed Mayor Gibson. He said he would do everything in his power to end the strike. And believe it or not, the following week, the strike ended. And then about 3 months later, one of the mayor's aides came to my house. I lived at 527 South 12th Street in Newark, New Jersey, across the street from Westside Park. And he knocked on the door. And I answered the door. Pete Curtin, who was the mayor's aide, said, the mayor wants to know if you were willing to be a member of the Newark Board of Education. I said, no, I was the president of the student council. I don't want to be a student representative. He said, no, not a student representative. You will be one of the 9 voting members of the Newark Board of Education. And on July 1st, 1971, at the age of 17, before I was even old enough to vote, I was appointed as a member of the Newark Board of Education. Now, why do I tell you that story? I'm not telling you that story to toot my own horn. I'm telling you that story because it is an example of how people were fighting during the civil rights movement, how people were organizing and mobilizing during the Black Power movement, how students that people didn't even pay attention to, once they got themselves together and got a collective agenda together and got a collective organization together, how they could wield political power. I tell you that story about what happened then because this is what we need students to do today in the 21st century. After I was appointed to the Board of Education, the end of July, I got a letter in the mail. The letter was from an organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And that organization said that it wanted to give me its Youth Leadership Award. And I looked down at the bottom of the page, and it couldn't be signed by Dr. Martin Luther King because he had been assassinated the year that I was a sophomore, 1968 at Arts High School. But I looked down at the bottom of that page, and on the bottom of that page was the name Coretta Scott King. And the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they flew me out to New Orleans, Louisiana. And they put me up in the Roosevelt Hotel. And that night they held a huge rally in the park in New Orleans. And before that huge crowd that was gathered, I received from the hands of Coretta Scott King the Youth Leadership Award of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So the next day they took me around to meet people. And I met Andrew Young, and I met Hosea Williams, and I met Jesse Jackson. And then there was a reception, and they took me to the reception. And over sitting on the side was someone very quiet, was not really milling around and meeting people. Man took me over there and said, I want to introduce you to this lady. I thought, when I looked at her, I thought she might have been one of my family members, because there was a striking resemblance to my own grandmother. He took me over there and he said, Larry Hamm, I want you to meet Rosa Parks. And I was able to meet and shake the hand and talk with Sister Rosa Parks. And I was so impressed by Sister Rosa Parks. When I came back from the SCLC conference in August of 1971, I put 2 motions before the new Board of Education. The first motion was to change the name of South 8th Street School to Martin Luther King School, and the second motion was to change the name of Waverly Avenue School to Rosa Parks School. Yes, in 1971. And I was to cross the paths of these leaders of the civil rights movement again and again over the next few years. In fact, a few years back, when Rosa Parks died, I took buses of people down to Washington, D.C., so that we could go to the Capitol building where she lay in state. The only woman in the history of the country to lay in state. That's an honor reserved only for presidents. And when Coretta Scott King died, we took busloads of people down to Atlanta. And I can remember going to the wake and passing and seeing the body of Coretta Scott King. Brothers and sisters, this is such a holy day. This is not just another holiday. We can't treat this holiday and like something common and make it into another sale day. This must be a day when we come together collectively, not just to celebrate the life of Martin Luther King, who was the titular leader of the civil rights movement, but to celebrate all the martyrs of the civil rights movement. And I don't mean just the men, because we hear their names all the time. But when we celebrate Dr. King, we got to remember Sister Rosa Parks. When we celebrate Dr. King, we got to remember Sister Fannie Lou Hamer. When we celebrate Dr. King, we got to remember Sister Ella Baker. When we celebrate Dr. King, we got to remember Sister Jo Ann Robinson that organized the Montgomery bus boycott. When we celebrate Dr. King, we have to remember the women who made as great a contribution to the civil rights movement as the men. Don't you know Dr. King was an ordained minister at 22 years old? When he was asked to head up the Montgomery Improvement Association, which launched the Montgomery bus boycott, the largest, longest, most successful boycott in the history of the United States of America, when E.D. Nixon, who was the president of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP, came to Dr. King. Dr. King was only 26 years old. He had just received his PhD, his Doctor of Philosophy degree at 26, not 36, not 46, 26 years old. We would be so lucky to finish a doctoral degree by 26 years old. When he headed up, when Rosa Parks sat in on December 1st, 1955, refused to give up her seat. And they had the first rally for the Montgomery bus boycott on December 5th, 1955. Dr. King was only 27 years old. When he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the greatest honor you could probably receive even today in this world, he was only 35 years old, the youngest person to ever have received the Nobel Peace Prize. The other thing you don't know about Dr. King, he liked to dance. When he was 16, he won the dance contest in Atlanta. See, and why do I say that? Because, brothers and sisters, when we celebrate great people, we have to be very careful as we iconize them, make them into icons. It's important for us to understand that Dr. King was not a god. He was not a god. He was a human being. And he made mistakes, like all human beings do. See, if you deify Dr. King, you put him so far away that most human beings will think that I could never achieve what Martin Luther King achieved. That's the danger of deification. Dr. King was a student at one time, just like all the students in this room. And the students in this room, you can be the next Martin Luther King. This is important to grasp. We can't deify him, but we must accord him the respect that he deserves, because he made a sacrifice that very few people can say they made. There are people walking around here today who think they should have a national statue, who think they should have a national holiday, who think they should have a street named after them. But what's the difference? That's right. He made a sacrifice few people make. He gave his life so that, in fact, we could have better lives. And people in this room, all puffed up because they think they did it on their own. If it hadn't been for Martin King, the civil rights movement, the nameless people whose names didn't get in the history books, you wouldn't have the degrees you have today. You wouldn't have the education. You wouldn't be able to live in the houses that you live today. So the question is this: what are we going to do? Because Dr. King's work is not finished. In fact, racism is worse today in 2018 than it was in 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. America is more segregated today in 2018 than it was in 1955 when Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott. And the irony is, there's greater segregation today in the North than in the South. Inequality is greater today than it was in 1968. There are twice as many poor people in America today as there were in 68 when Dr. King was launching the Poor People's Movement. Inequality is greater than it has ever been in human history. Right now, 18 men in the United States have more wealth than the entire half of the population. Right now, do you know what it would take to close the wealth gap between white families and black families in this country? The latest study says at the current rate of social progress, it would take 280 years to close the wealth gap. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to wait 280 years. Brothers and sisters, now is the time for us and for the young people of this nation to rise up and turn this country around. Now is the time for protest. Now is the time for marching. Now is the time for boycotts. Now is the time for voting. Now is the time for us to use every weapon of mass protest that we have to fight racism. We got to fight racism, whether it's on our block or whether it's in the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So I challenge you as I leave this podium, I challenge those of you who are in this room now. I challenge those of you who are members of organizations on this college campus to make these organizations relevant to what is happening to people in this country, to take up the issues that need to be taken up. As rich as the United States of America is, there should be free college education for every student in the United States of America. They just, a few years ago, they just forgave billions of dollars of debt to the banks in this country. And our students are graduating as indentured servants with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of college loans. We need to forgive all student debt. Why do we burden these young people like that? This country is rich enough to eliminate poverty. It's rich enough to eliminate poverty. It's rich enough to eliminate inequality. It's rich enough to pay our young people. They can't do nothing with $7.35 an hour. You can't pay rent with that. You can't do nothing with that except go to work. There needs to be $15 an hour minimum wage. In fact, we shouldn't have a minimum wage. We should have a living wage in the United States of America. And the other thing that Dr. King talked about was universal health care. Why should you worry about going to see a doctor or dentist? Why should we be saddled with these enormous premiums and co-pays? Why does this have to exist? Why should we have a system of health care based on profit? We should have universal Medicare for all, for everybody in the United States of America. These are the things that Dr. King is fighting for. So as I leave, I want you to get involved. It's not enough to just talk about Dr. King. You got to study Dr. King. He wrote 6 books: Measure of a Man, Stride Toward Freedom, Strength to Love, Why We Can't Wait, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and Trumpet of Conscience. I challenge this university, as I challenge all the universities of this nation. If we're going to have a national holiday, Dr. King's works should be required reading in the curriculum and in the courses of our universities and colleges across the country. So I challenge you to take up the mantle of struggle, as the students took it up in the 60s. It was students that rose up and ended the war in Vietnam. It was students who were the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement. It was students around the world who helped to bring apartheid to an end. And you students can transform this country into a country for all human beings. Thank you very much. Power to the people.